What's going on, guys? We're back, and we got a lot to cover in this video. Yesterday, I posted a video where kind of broke down, I guess, my opinion on why the tide is shifting in Ukraine, and we're starting to see more of an advantage on the Ukrainian side rather than the Russian side. It was a different style, different format video, and you guys seemed to like it, and we had a lot of discussion in the comments. Um, I got a few comments on that video that I was too harsh on the USA by the way I kind of described the situation here in Ukraine. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit in this video, as well as cover the fact that a US Apache helicopter was shot down over the Strait of Hormuz by an Iranian drone. So we're going to cover these couple of things, probably be a shorter video, but important stuff. So please do me a favor, like, share, subscribe. You guys want to blow this channel up, man. Hit that hype button. There was a handful of you guys in the comments that are saying, hey, where's the hype button? I can't hype the video. From my understanding, it's like a algorithm thing where it'll just give you the hype button every kind of randomly. You know how like on a website or an app, when you're using it, this thing will pop up and say like, are you enjoying our app? Is this app useful to you? You know, press yes or no, or 1 out of 5. It kind of strikes me as something like that, where it just pops up and it's like, you want to hype this and push it to more people or no? So I don't think it's something that like everybody has all the time. But I could be wrong about that. Let me know in the comments. So let's start with my comments and opinions about the United States support of Ukraine since the full-scale invasion in 2022. Um, so I've been pretty critical on the USA and pretty harsh, and I agree with that. And I understand where people are coming from. And in the comments, I noticed there's about a 50-50 split of people that agree with what I'm saying in the sense that the United States needs to do more, or they should have done more. I think the expectation of the United States doing anything anymore is kind of out the window. I don't think many people expect that anymore, but prior. And then the other half of people were more like, hey, uh, Ukraine wouldn't even be standing if it wasn't for the United States at the beginning of the full scale invasion. There's a lot of people talking about, yeah, we don't want to give them free weapons and vehicles and stuff anymore. It raises prices in the U.S. and blah blah blah, which is all understandable. And for the record, this isn't like a hey, I'm dissing anybody video. This is a I want to talk about it because I love having these kinds of conversations, even if it gets a little spicy, as long as it's respectful, right? The purpose of it, adults should be able to talk about controversial issues like this. It's when adults harden up and get so stuck in their own way and refuse to communicate or see the other person's side is when problems happen, and that's what we see a lot. There's this phrase called says silence is violence, right? And it means when people stop talking, that's when bad stuff happens. So I love talking about this stuff, man. And I respect I respect the other opinions. So here's my perspective of it. Here's why I'm so critical. Um, in 1994, the United States, along with Russia, Ukraine, and the UK, and Kazakhstan, I believe, signed what's called the Budapest Memorandum. The Budapest Memorandum we've talked about a lot on this channel. But basically, it was an agreement that Ukraine and Kazakhstan and Belarus, I believe, would give up their nuclear weapons that they currently held in exchange for security assurances, in exchange for protection from these other co-signees of this memorandum, which would be the United States and the UK. So I'll put it up here, Budapest Memorandum. Check it out, read it in more detail if you want. But basically, in 1994, the US and the UK said, hey, give us your nukes, right? Because that was a very controversial time. Nukes have always been very controversial. Typically, the less nukes that are out there, the safer people feel, right? So the US and the UK said, hey, give us your nukes and we'll cover you. Specifically, they said prohibited Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom from threatening or using military force or economic coercion against Ukraine, Belarus, or Kazakhstan, um, except in self defense or otherwise in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, Article 5, typically, right? Um, so this says verbatim prohibits Russia from threatening or using military force or economic coercion against Ukraine. The United States and the UK signed this. Okay. Just because new presidents come into office every 4 to 8 years doesn't mean we just go back on agreements that were made with previous administrations. So the Ukraine gave a massive trust fall, if you will, to the West, to the U.S. and the U.K., saying, "Okay, we'll give up our nukes, which are our main defense against Russia. We'll give these up. Just please promise us you have our backs." Right? It was a trust fall, and of course, this was signed. The U.S. and the U.K. said, "Yeah, we got you. Basically, just give us your nukes, and we got your back after that." Fast forward to 2014, Russia annexed Crimea and part of the Donbass. Right then and there, broke the Budapest Memorandum. That all of that kind of flew under the radar for. I mean, in comparison to the full scale invasion. People were talking about the annexation of Crimea and Russia in Donbass and the fighting out there, but it was more looked at like a brother spat, a brother feud, right? Like two brothers that are, scrapping. Um, it much different than the full scale invasion. So when the full scale invasion happened, it was a much larger operation. Obviously, uh, it Putin said his goal was to take Kyiv, and this is when really the Budapest Memorandum should have kicked in 2014, but now it should be all hands on deck. We told the Ukrainians we would protect them if they gave us our nukes. We need to stick to our word, stick to the deal, stick to the memorandum. We gotta cover them. We gotta help them against Russia. And in some capacity, the United States and the UK did. Okay, so I want to be clear about this part. There, the amount of aid that was given, this was during the Biden administration, technically, from the Biden administration and Biden's US at that time, USA. That aid and support to Ukraine was crucial for that stage of the full scale invasion. The amount of weapons, ammunition, intelligence, all of that absolutely helped, probably in uncalculable amount, to save Kyiv, save Ukrainian people, save territory, and all of the above, right? So that was a huge, massive support. And in my opinion, that is the least the US and the UK could do in regards to abiding by the Budapest Memorandum. My initial thought was, okay, Russia broke the Budapest Memorandum, boots on the ground, protect Ukraine at all costs. They gave up their nukes and are trusting us. We need to back up our word, garner that trust that Ukraine has in us, that we promise them. We get in there, we stop this, we end it, we defend Ukraine. That's my opinion, right? But other people can't make the argument. It's not our war, not the United States' war, not the UK's war. They don't want to see United States or UK troops die, which is all understandable. So the US decided to send money from the sidelines, right? Send money and resources, supplies, stuff like that, which were very helpful. Okay, so that was in 2022. And then if we fast forward 2022 to 2023, was still a lot of help from the United States. Large support packages being passed through Congress and being passed through the House, or being passed through, yeah, pretty much all parts of the government, right? And some of these were being passed in a couple of days, up to a week. That's how fast these things were getting passed. People pretty much bipartisanly agreed on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrats in the House and in the Senate, wanted to help Ukraine. The votes were going through almost unanimously, and these packages were getting sent through, and the aid was getting to Ukraine. And that was huge. 2024, we start to see discrepancy in some of these policy. People start getting war fatigue. They start thinking, wow, okay, this wasn't over in a week, let alone a couple of years. We have stuff we want to focus on in the United States. So this support starts to dwindle a bit, but the United States was still the leading supporter in 2024. But it was starting to even out with the European countries. If you take all of the European countries combined and the United States support, right? And then 2025 hit. Trump was elected president. He was inaugurated in January. 99% of all support and aid stopped. The current packages that were being still in transitions that were already passed before, but are now still have to get through the bureaucracy of the US government, those were being put on hold. And in some cases, the whole review process was being told they need to start over. Now, basically, Trump was saying, hold on. Or the Trump administration was saying, hold on, we're new here this is a new administration. We need to check what's going on here. This is a lot of money, a lot of resources, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fair. So this happened, and then there was a spat in the White House between the U.S. administration, specifically J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, against Zelensky. They invited President Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, to the White House and basically berated him in front of the world. It was one of the most heartbreaking things that I have seen to this day in my life. Seriously, I was watching that, my jaw was dropped, and I was like, oh my God, this is awful. That's not the America that I grew up in right there. That is embarrassing. It's sad. It's mean. It's evil spirited. Broke my heart, dude. And from that moment, a switch flipped in my head. I was so angry and upset, especially when I saw JD Vance jump in the discussion like he had to protect Donald Trump. Like, oh, excuse me, President. Listen, like, oh, dude, I just I started getting violent inside. So, anyways, this spat took place, and that basically solidified that the administration was no longer going to be supporting Ukraine, not in the capacity that they were. Again, 99% of support stopped around that time. So, 2025, no more support from the US. 2026, no more support from the US. So, to me, that is blatantly turning your back against the Budapest Memorandum, blatantly turning your back against the Ukrainian people and the country of Ukraine, and really the American people, in the sense that the US, the country of the United States of America, agreed to this memorandum to protect this country. And now, because you got in a scrap with the president of Ukraine in the White House, now you're just going to say, nah, we're not going to do that anymore. No. So that's kind of a breakdown as far as the aid goes. So maybe I don't talk about the amount of help the U.S. has given Ukraine, or even given and loaned to Ukraine from the 2022 to 2020, early 2024, mid 2024, more or less. I will absolutely accept that. I'm so involved here in Ukraine, right? And I have a lot of bias in this situation, right? So I admit that I probably I overlook that help, and that's not fair. So I want to acknowledge that. But that was then, this is now. So what we're seeing now is the United States, again, is out of the picture in regards to supporting Ukraine. I would imagine there's some aspect of intelligence still being shared, especially now that Russia has been proven to be helping Iran in the war in Iran against Israel and the US. So I would imagine there's some sort of intelligence sharing or gathering or giving, maybe with the CIA to Ukrainian the Ukrainian special services. That's a hard metric to quantify because we don't know, right? But what we can quantify is the dollar amounts that are being sent, the amount of vehicles, the amount of ammunition, all that stuff, which is zero now. And part of the reason the US administration wanted to do this was to force Europe to step up to the plate. And in this regard, I understand because the European nations, they're not, or the ones we're talking about that talk most about wanting to support Ukraine. I'm talking about France, I'm talking about England, I'm talking about Germany. So when we're talking about these countries, these are not impoverished countries. These are not third world countries. There is no reason that they could not be shelling out a lot more to support their Eastern ally who is on the front lines protecting Europe. So I 100% agree in that capacity, in that aspect, that Europe to bed, basically. The fact that we have to compare the United States' support to every single European country's support. I mean, we're talking about multiple countries together against one country, the US together, and we're comparing these metrics. That's not right. If the US was compared to England, for example, okay, or France, for example, okay, that's more of an apples to apples comparison. Saying that, oh, Europe is still giving almost as much as the U.S., but not taking into consideration we're talking about multiple countries with multiple positive GDPs and a lot of um, wealth in these countries. That's not fair. And I think that gets looked over, right? So these countries absolutely needed to step up to the plate. And since the United States stopped supporting Ukraine, Europe has definitely stepped up to the plate. So if you want to say that was Trump's plan or the U.S. administration's plan, okay, it worked. Now it worked. Get back into it and continue helping your allies. Okay, Europe realized, all right, we need to support more. They're sending more and more and more now. Now imagine if the U.S. stepped back in and at least supported in an equivalent capacity as the EU, right? That would be huge for Ukraine. We're talking about countless lives saved, countless territories, property, money, all kinds of stuff. So, but no, that's not a thing. The U.S., especially now, the U.S. is very much involved in the Middle East and kind of more concerned about that stuff. One of the big arguments that I also saw in the comments was is a similar comment that Trump makes in a lot of his statements about Ukraine is, there's something called a big ocean in between Europe and the U.S. It's, we're not threatened. It's not really our problem. So we don't really have to help, right? Okay, if that's the stance that the administration wants to take or Trump wants to take, that's fine. But use that same stance in Israel, okay? Israel's even further away than Ukraine, with more water and more seas and more oceans in between it than Ukraine and the US. So if you're going to use that philosophy, be consistent and do the same with Israel. But no, when Israel calls and I don't want to make this sound like I'm bagging on Israel, but let's compare it here. When Israel calls and says we need help, the U.S. drops everything, says what do you need and when, and it's done. Multi-billions of dollars, assets, ammunition, whatever they need is sent to Israel, non-starter immediately, um, or non-stop immediately. That kind of support I would love to see for Ukraine, which is kind of what we saw at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. To me, it's very obvious that the current U.S. presidency is biased. They care more about Israel. They probably have more financial ties or more incentive to help Israel than they do Ukraine, which, in my opinion, is a twisted ideology because it makes so much strategic sense for the United States to help Ukraine 100%. And here's why. Russia, at least they used to be, was number two, number one for a while, probably number two biggest global enemy for, or global threat, I should say, to the United States. Number one being China, number two being Russia. So this is a perfect way to destroy Russia, more or less, at least their economy and their military, through Ukraine, right? Even if you want to look at this only through a America First lens, right? And not from a police of the world, the United States needs to protect everybody lens. If we're looking through this only through a America First lens, this is a super pro America move, would be to support Ukraine, basically use Ukraine as a proxy, supply them with everything they need to defeat America's number two enemy or number two threat. It makes so much sense, right? And in turn, that'll also wound, if you will, that'll also damage America's number one threat, which is China, because of the close ties that China and Russia have. So there's this perspective that, well, it makes more sense that we're helping Israel because, Iran's a threat and the Middle East has been a threat and they've killed a lot of Americans in the past, blah, blah, which, okay, fair. But that's very similar situation in comparison with Russia, with the exception of, Russians directly killing United States soldiers. They are still absolutely a threat to the free world and democracy and need to be handled. And the United States basically found an excuse to finally get into Iran and take out the IRGC, the tyrannical regime that has been supplying, which is the number one state sponsor of terror in the entire world. They have an excuse to do the same with Russia on a golden platter right in front of them, saying, "Here, you don't even have to put boots on the ground. Don't fly your air. Don't use the Air Force or Navy. No, just use Ukraine and handle the number two threat to to the USA." Again, that's my perspective, but what we're seeing in turn is actually the opposite. We're seeing this weird kind of buddy relationship with President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin. We saw President Trump use the United States military to roll out a literal red carpet for the largest terrorist in the world, Vladimir Putin, on American soil in Alaska. Um, we have seen multiple phone calls where Trump is starting to kind of take a stance against Russia, more or less, or at least start to agree with popular public opinion, which is Russia bad, Ukraine good, right? And we would start to see Trump kind of start to lean this way. He'd have a phone call with Putin and he'd come back and be like, nah, never mind. For example, when apparently the US was very close to sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Trump called Vladimir Putin, had a 2-hour phone call, unmonitored, and came back and said, Vladimir doesn't want us to send those Tomahawks, so we're not going to send them. Okay. What? So instead of seeing the United States use the Ukraine war as a kind of a tool to protect freedom and democracy and weaken one of the largest threats to freedom and democracy, we are seeing the opposite. And in some cases, actually helping Russia in the sense of releasing or using these sanction waivers that the U.S. had sanctions on Russia's oil economy, which Russia's a number one resource, or is a one resource economy, oil. That is their number one resource. They've been the biggest supplier, producer of this resource, which makes it also their weakness. If you start to sanction that, it'll hurt them really bad. The United States placed sanctions on them during the in the beginning of the full scale in 2022 during the Biden administration. And as of 3 months ago, we started making waivers, is basically the political term of meaning of saying we got rid of a lot of these sanctions so Russia could sell their gas in order to help the global price of oil drop because it has gone up ever since the war in Iran. So that is the United States actively helping Russia, whether directly or indirectly. It is helping them. It's helping them to the tune of 19 to 22 billion dollars in the last 3 months. And this sanction relief was supposed to be for 30 days, 1 month. So we're talking a lot of financial support to Russia, which one can only imagine would go to not only their oil industry that Ukraine is actively trying to destroy, but also their war in Ukraine and oppressing the Ukrainian people, killing civilians, unspeakable horrors to the Ukrainian people. So this is, I mean, this is one of the reasons I'm so disappointed in the United States' administration, and there's a very thick, deep line, a difference between not liking the United States government and not liking the United States of America. I am patriotic through and through, support the United States 100%. I love the American people. I love the United States of America and everything it stands for. When the government goes directly against what the United States was founded off of, its founding principles of protecting democracy and freedom, that's when I get upset. The reason I'm so upset is because of my love for the United States. So I want to be clear about that. It's not like, oh, this guy moved to Ukraine, he fought in a foreign army, he lives in Ukraine, he doesn't care about the U.S. anymore. That's not the case at all, dude. The U.S. is my home and always will be. So there's a difference, though. Don't think that, hey, if you love Donald Trump and MAGA and the government, that you're a great American and you're patriotic. No, that's not how it works. In fact, I would argue that most very pro-patriotic Americans are anti-big government and anti-big corporation and anti-corruption and pro-freedom and democracy, right? So there's that, I guess. This has gone on longer than I expected, so we'll end it here. A little bit of a tangent, but I hope that that kind of explains things better from my perspective. Again, I love having these conversations. I like hearing your point of view, and I am more than happy to read, and I do read these comments, obviously, and I reply to them. I'm more than willing to see things from a different perspective. And if I am misunderstanding something or maybe not seeing the full picture, I would love that to be brought to my attention. I can research it, study it, and realize, okay, I was wrong. And that's happened countless times in my life. I have been wrong more than I've been right, probably. No matter what way I look at this situation, through this perspective, talking with so many people actually living in Ukraine, actually fighting in Ukraine, living in the US, talking with Ukrainians, talking with Russians, talking with Americans, talking with Europeans. No matter how I slice this cake, man, the US has failed Ukraine. And the UK has as well. Undoubtedly. Absolutely. But I'm not European. I'm not from the UK. I can't bag too hard on that. I am from the US, so I can speak more closely to that. But the UK, man, the thing is I think there's a lot less expected from the European countries, frankly. There's a lot more expected from the United States. They've been the police of the world for a long time. They've been expected to be the champion of freedom, of democracy, of the free world, right? And we've seen that champion put their sword away and turn their back on Ukraine. So let me know what you think. Maybe this will be controversial, or you guys will agree, or we'll get both. But I'll see you guys in the comments. We'll talk more about it. I love you. We'll see you in the next video.